Okay, so having said that, I am going to start with Laurie. Laurie, you're first on my screen, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm a community worker in County Wicklow. I also work on the CICAP programme, but for today I'm here from a community work point of view. I suppose what I'd like to know from today is, I'm not sure exactly, but just in terms of public sector duty within the community sector, but also I suppose the role of NGOs and how everything kind of crosses over in terms of European funding and different things like that. I suppose, if you understand that, I'm not sure.
Yep, that's great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thanks.
Yeah. Roisin.
Hi, I'm Roisin O'Neill and I'm the Community Links Worker with the Think Equality Project in Donegal. We're an anti-racism organisation and we will be informing statutory agencies about public sector duty. So any information would be gratefully received. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds very great, Roisin, right? Very pertinent to your work. Caitlin?
Yeah, so I work with Roisin. I'm the project manager of Think Equality Donegal, and we're going to give training to different public bodies on how they can implement public sector duty, and we're actually having our pilot session tomorrow. So this is coming at a great time for us. So hopefully we've left nothing out, or yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona. I work for ILMI, and I oversee a project called Strategies for Change. Jacqueline is one of our key speakers, so it's great. We are an anti-ableist organization, and we're run by and controlled by disabled people, so we're a DPO. And there's a few of us here today, so we're really interested in the public sector duty, but like the practicalities of using it, and Jacqueline, we spoke about it. How do you use it, in your everyday life? That's me.
Yeah. That sounds great, Fiona. That sounds, same type of thinking as we have. So I'm going to go to Caroline next, and then Elaine, and then Paul.
Hi, I'm Caroline Cho, and I'm the Kerry Public Participation Network Development Officer. And I just think sessions like this are so beneficial, because for over 2 years, an awful lot of the work has been reactionary. So it gives a great opportunity to just get your head in that space of the information and how to apply the information to your work on the ground as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, and I suppose what we're trying to do is bring the community work angle to this theme and the other themes all the time. Yeah. Elaine, and then Paul.
So my name's Elaine. I do respite support work. So I'm working in mental health and intellectual disabilities. So I'm just looking at the role of public sector duty and applying that in community work. So this is quite new to me. So I'm looking for any help with that.
Okay, great. That sounds great, Elaine. Yeah, thank you. Paul?
Hi, Paul Kernan. I'm the coordinator of Donegal Intercultural Platform. We've been going for quite a while, but a bit like ILMI, we're beneficiaries under the new pilot CDP programme, so we're now resourced and funded and have 2 staff. I sort of feel that I'm interested in really updating my understanding and my knowledge, and also, I'm interested, it is really looking at the community work perspective on public sector duty. I feel we've been talking about this with seminars, with PPNs, with council staff, with people for some time. So this sort of, I'm hoping to update that. It's also, as I mentioned before, we've now been part of a process that's developed an inclusion strategy for the county, a 2021 to 2026 strategy. And public sector duty appears on every other page, as does our project name. But I'd love to know the practice of implementation of that and a challenge of implementing that. So I'm hopeful that you guys are going to tell me exactly what to do.
No bother, no pressure. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Kate, then Angel, and then Mary.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Hagan. I am the Community Development and Health Worker, and I work for an organisation called Donegal Travellers Project up in the Northwest. I guess in terms of my expectations today, with DTP, we have an intercultural training initiative, so an awful lot, and we're actually partnered with the intercultural platform, and we do an awful lot of anti-racism, intercultural training across the county. And I would bring in the public sector duty snippets into that training. But I guess from my perspective, what I'd like to get out today is how to kind of engage better, I guess, with statutory agencies with the duty, and like having that community development focus and approach to the duty. You know, the duty has been around from 2014, and it's something that, you know, we would go to agencies and we talk about it and they wouldn't really know what it is. So it's like, how do you fully engage with that process and walking the walk with statutory agencies to make sure they're implementing the duty, I guess. So that's my kind of expectation for today.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Kate. Angel, and then Mary.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angel. I am part of Culture Migrant Center here in Nava. And I am interested in, how we can build understanding between service providers and migrants and refugees. I am trying to understand that's kind of relation, specifically in rural areas. That's the place that we have been working. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Mary?
Hi everyone, my name is Mary Higgins and I work with DLDC, Donegal Local Development Company, and I work on the CICAP Goal 2 programme, and we deal with individuals and in particular people that want to get back into employment. So maybe from today, just to get a little bit of information that I might use with migrants or refugees or asylum seekers that I'll be working with in the future. If there's any questions that they have that I might be able to help, or maybe refer them to other organisations or that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mary. Lisa, then Nicola, then Paula, then Clive.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Ennis. I'm a community worker in Kildare County Council at the moment. So I think that this workshop is going to be really relevant to the work that I do. I have some limited knowledge on it myself, but I suppose internally within the council, it's not something that I hear people speak about. It's not something that I think there's a great understanding of. So for me, my hope is that if I get a really solid practical understanding of the public sector duty, that I can try and maybe infiltrate that internally. That's my hope.
It sounds really good. Yeah. It's always good to somebody on the inside, Lisa. Nicola?
I'm Nicola and I work with ILMI, started this year on the Voice project. So essentially it's setting up online digital platforms in different counties where there's no ILMI presence, and through like sort of peer mentoring, offering people opportunity to participate in certain courses, empowering people to make change and create a more inclusive community in a nutshell. In terms of the public sector duty, to be honest, all I knew up to before working with ILMI was in the context that a public sector, there's a responsibility to fill a quota. Every government body had to employ X amount of disabled people. So now I know that it's a lot more than that. There's an obligation to ensure that there's no discrimination, that people's rights are upheld within the workplace. And I would hope to see if there's a way of using that, like if somebody isn't employed or starts working somewhere, but for various reasons, doesn't leaves after a while because of maybe constructive dismissal. That there might be a way there to use that to assist.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Nicola. Paula?
Hi, and my name is Paula Carney. I work with ICON's Women Housing Forum. The reason I want to do this training was I wanted to be able to understand how to challenge to challenge out unconscious sort of discrimination and ensure that public services and statutory agencies are upholding the public sector duty, and if not, how can we encourage them to implement that? And when I say unconscious, I'm talking about services. I'll give you for an example. There is one in the north in our city for people who use drugs, a clinic, and there's no ramps going up to it. Even though where people get their methadone is on the one level, the doctors, the nurses, everything is upstairs. And considering a lot of people who use drugs end up injecting into that grind and have huge issues with their legs, that's certainly not public sector duty is not being upheld within that. Yeah. You know, so I don't think it's being done deliberately. It's unconscious, and there's none of that consideration for the extra needs that some people have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of why we're here today, Paula. Yeah, thank you so much. And last but not least, Clive.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Sorry for being a few minutes late. I had to jump back from a previous meeting. Right, so my name's Clive Lowry. I work for Independent Living Movement Ireland on what's called the On-Site Social Inclusion Project in County Louth. My role is that I'm trying to we're coming to the end of that on-site project, so we're trying to develop local DPOs, and the government, the state body has obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and what I'm hoping to gain is information on how we can support the local authority and statutory bodies to include to develop local DPOs throughout Ireland and help Ireland effectively ratify the UNCRPD or implement the UNCRPD ratification. So I'm hoping to get information on how we can support the state bodies to implement UNCRPD, and how we as a civil society organisation can, what our role will be in helping them.
Yeah.
Sorry, ranting a little bit there, but that.
No, it's a good rant. It's a good rant because it's important to see how all of these things are intertwined, and how they can be used, you know, together, as opposed to looking at the public sector duty over there and looking at the UNCRPD over there. You know, we really need to bring them together. So a good rant, Clive. Thanks a million for that. I should have said at the start that we do have apologies from Ciara Shanahan, who is the coordinator of AIEB, and she is really sick. She'd hate to have missed today, so she sends her apologies. But we do have Anna Clark, who's doing a piece of work with AIEB. But before I hand over to you, Anna, and Anna's going to tell us a little bit more about continuous practice development and what we're calling this badging, the badging process. Before I hand over to you, Anna, I am just going to ask Rachel and Jacqueline to introduce themselves. So Jacqueline, maybe, and you know, I'll say the nice stuff about you in a while, but just to say hello.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacqueline Healy, and I'm Public Sector Duty Manager with the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. And already I'm feeling completely challenged about my presentation. I'm really looking forward to, I hope my presentation will cover some of the questions, but you know, hopefully we'll have a chance for questions and discussion afterwards. And I'm happy to discuss with you and explore how to apply the duty more practically in your work.
Yep, thank you so much, Jacqueline. Rachel?
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Doyle, and I'm Joint National Coordinator of Community Work Ireland. And I suppose the reason that myself and Anne are on the agenda to do an input on the duty is because both of us were involved in rolling out a project with civil society in Galway City last year on the public sector duty. So we just wanted to share that experience with you of bringing people together in a local area to take on the public sector duty and try and push and advance it at local level. So that's why we're on the agenda today.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. And Anna, I'm going to hand over to you now. Anna, maybe to just talk to us about the continuous practice development. Well, introduce yourself and say hello, first of all, and then tell us a little bit about CPD and the badging process. And then I will run through the agenda with people and let people know what we're going to be doing for the rest of the day before I hand over back to Jacqueline.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Anna Clark. I'm based in County Derry in the north, and I'm a community development practitioner. And I'm currently, as Anne said, doing some work with the All Ireland endorsement body around, well, a number of pieces of work actually, supporting AIEB's work programme and taking that forward. So one of the things that involves is looking at the opportunities for the development of a continuous professional development framework for community work practitioners on an all Ireland basis. And I'm just going to very briefly share a couple of quick slides just to sort of outline what that means for AIEB at this point in time, because it is a work in progress. So in terms of the CPD, AIEB has been looking at the ways in which a framework for CPD could be developed that would support community work practitioners to develop and enhance the range of knowledge, skills, abilities, understanding that they have and continue to develop throughout their careers or working life, bearing in mind that we tend to move about quite a bit as well. But essentially, it is very much about recognising that for a lot of us, we do an initial qualification that gets us into a role, but our careers last a lot longer than that, and there is a need, a really important need, to continue to develop our professional skills and practice over the years so that we can remain relevant and up to date, particularly with a lot of the issues that are challenging us in our practice. So thinking around the opportunities for the development of a framework for community work, continuous professional development, thinking about what that might look like. And one of the things that would be underpinning that for our field of practice is a common set of standards, which would be the All Ireland standards for community work. So looking at learning opportunities that are connected into and underpinned by those standards. And as Anne said, possibly badged by AIEB, and that may be a familiar term for you or not quite so familiar. It can mean different things to different people, but partially it is about that recognition of quality assuring learning opportunities that constitute continuous professional and continuous practice development, so that there is a process of quality assurance that those processes have gone through, and that's essentially what the badging of programs might look like, but there's also the opportunities around electronic badging of those programs that enable practitioners who engage in different pieces of learning over a period of time to actually build like an electronic portfolio that brings all of that together in one place as well. And the aspect in relation to continuous practice development is very much about looking at opportunities that supports all workers to engage in ongoing practice development, regardless of the professional qualifications that they may or may not hold that are underpinning the field of practice that they're in. So this is not a fait accompli, it's a process that's ongoing at the moment. And Anne had made reference to the conversations that had taken place previously that have led to this session and the other three that are lined up for the next few months. And that engagement process is something that AIEB is still very interested in. So my next and final slide, if I can get it to move on. Oh, my screen has frozen. That's really convenient. Sorry about this, folks. There we go. Is actually just really sort of saying that we're keen to hear from you further about these types of ideas in thinking about continuous professional development. There are a variety of ways in which those learning opportunities can take place, and the box on the right hand side of the screen just gives some examples of those. Some of that is very structured, might be formalised through planned initiatives, and some of it less structured, more self-directed, the things that we probably all do to varying degrees to build our own knowledge, skills and understanding around specific issues, aspects of practice, or reflect personally on our own practice in relation to the values that underpin our work, for example. And all of that constitutes professional development opportunities. But what we want to look at as a framework is how we bring all of that together in a meaningful way. And we're interested in your thoughts and views around all of that as well. So I'm not really going to say anything else at this point other than to say that at the end of the session, there will be an evaluation form that you'll be asked to complete. And there's a couple of questions in there that ask you to give us your thoughts and contributions around some of the questions that will help develop thinking around the idea of a framework for our field of practice in relation to continuous professional development. And there's also an indication that you can give us if you'd be interested in taking part in further follow-up conversation around this later in the year. And we'd be absolutely delighted if you would. So that's really where the thinking is at the moment. There's a lot more to be done, and we'd really value your input into that. And I'm going to be sitting in on the rest of this session as well. So I'll pick up on any thoughts that might emerge in relation to CPD that might come up here too. So thanks very much, Anne.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. And I suppose just building on what you're saying, like we're both ourselves and AIEB stands for the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Training and Development. And I suppose like many organisations around the screen, as you've said, has existed for quite a while, but the resourcing of AIEB is quite new. So we're absolutely delighted that Ciara Shanahan has been in place now for almost a year, and Anna has been working and doing pieces of work for AIEB even before that. So it's great to have that resource, and it really has, I think, focused our minds and opened up opportunities to move into what we know is a vacuum. Like, we know there has been a vacuum in relation to opportunities for continuous practice development, continuous professional development for community workers, opportunities to learn new skills or to upskill in different areas to enable us to respond to loads of different issues, and I suppose the entrenchment of issues that have been happening over the last few years. So I suppose it's a very new and exciting path that we are trying to forge. So before we ask Jacqueline to give us her presentation, Rachel is actually just going to bring us through just, I suppose, just a very quick opening discussion on your experience of the public sector duty to date. So is it okay to hand over to you, Rachel?
Sure, yeah. And as this is just a general open discussion, just to get our heads into the kind of space of thinking about our own experience of the public sector duty, the level of knowledge, giving us a sense of levels of knowledge that people have, any engagements that you have. So it's an open forum. So I'm just literally going to throw out a question there, which is, has anyone engaged in projects, initiatives, or kind of, I suppose, interventions around trying to promote the public sector duty in your work? Are there any examples that people have that they'd like to share, or experiences? Ashley, do you want to come in? Don't all jump together.
Sorry, I actually missed I'm working from home, and someone knocked at the door and I missed what you said. I only got the end of it.
Okay, Paula, it was just we just wanted to get a sense of if anyone had any experience of working on the public sector duty to date, of engaging with it, or of trying to push it essentially in your work, in your areas.
I would have, not in me work now, but I'd be part of a group called Service Users' Rights in Action. And we would have done a bit of research with people who were on long-term methadone use. And we were coming up with a lot of issues around how people felt discriminated against by things such as practicing supervised urine sampling, how it was degrading and the human rights were being discriminated against and all. So through working with IREC, we got an equality review on methadone services. So I think the HSC then had to respond and implement, they had to remove the supervised urine sampling and all. Like, you know, there is still, urine sampling is still being used as a way of monitoring people's drug use, but that invasive side of it, where somebody standing there watching a person who goes for treatment, that's been taken out within HSC, no, not in all services, but within HSC services because of it.
Yeah, and they did change their practice then.
Yeah.
And you used the public sector duty as the tool to make that
as the tool to get the quality review codes.
Right, great. Thanks a million, Paula. And I think you worked with CAN as well on that, didn't you?
Yeah, it was CAN and Service Users' Rights in Action. That's right.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Paula. Fiona?
Yeah, like we had Jacqueline come into our space last year. So as I said before, I coordinate a program called Strategies for Change, and it's about empowering disabled people across Ireland to know about their rights and to collectively seek change. But after Jacqueline's presentation last year, I tried to get a piece of information from the County Council Development Plan. So I was looking for the development plan in an easy read format and in a plain English format. And I think I talked to about 10 different people, Jacqueline, over 2 months, but I still haven't got it. You know, and it is a public sector duty to provide that information. And like I did say, I do have a right to do it and to seek it, to look for it. But yeah, I'm not sure whether all public bodies are aware of the public sector duty and the responsibility to civil society.
Yeah. Jacqueline's nodding her head there too, but we can bring that into the discussion later, and also maybe a discussion around sanctions and the lack of, you know, sanctions for state bodies that actually do not implement the duty in the way that they're supposed to. Caroline?
Hi, I was just thinking about the experiences I had, and it's very much working with the different departments in the local authority, and the buy-in and the knowledge is very hit and miss. And I would query how much actual knowledge or understanding or obligation they really get about the public sector duty. My one was in relation to, actually one was the county development plan and that whole easy read, and we actually ourselves made a very kind of simple how-to video to get it out to the public. But the other one was to do with sign language and ensuring that all information going out is user-friendly, and you also have information signed as well to be inclusive as possible. But by and large, it was very hit and miss on the knowledge. I don't think it was deliberate. I just think that there's a lack of knowledge or understanding in some areas, and then in others it was terrific and they completely got it and were buying into it. So maybe a piece of work needs to be done on that whole area.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. And I know IREC are doing a huge amount of work in terms of trying to get that information out there, but there's a lot of state agencies and the commitment mightn't always be there on their part. Paul?
Just I mentioned in the introduction stage just that we've spoken a lot about the duty in Donegal. It hasn't really moved beyond support for the principle, discussion about the ideas. There hasn't been any bleed into the practice, and that's been partly to do with the fact that a lot of the training or information sharing has been initiated by community bodies or PPM, social inclusion linkage groups and bodies like that. It hasn't really become mainstream within the local authority, and no pressure, Caitlin, but there is great hope that there will be some opportunity and some buy-in because of the inclusion strategy that we've been working on for the last year or so. That becomes part of the practice of the local authority and others. I suppose the other thing I would say is when we talk with people, there's a perception it's all about the local authority. And really, when you look into it, it's actually about the publicly funded organisations and agencies within the state. It isn't just the local authority. And there's a little bit of sort of shimmying away from, oh, well, that's not us, that's the council. And I think that's an important piece of information. And it's really great, Paula and Clive, talking about how they're taking those principles and applying those to areas of practice that might be health related or other issues. Sure. They're about exercising and achieving people's rights. And I'm fascinated by that, but I'm very aware that there seems to be a slight sort of shying away from the principle or the implementation, and also it's not us, it's them when it's talking about.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Okay, anybody else want to jump in before we hand over to Jacqueline to tell us what the public sector duty is?
I just think it's a very good point that Paul made there, and I think there needs to be more active dialogue between delivery of services within government funded programs and also NGOs as well.
Yeah.
With local authorities and LCDCs.
Yeah.
Clive has his hand up, Rachel. You might see.
Clive.
Sorry, Rachel, and thank you, Anne. Just quickly, I represented ILMI reporting to the UNCOPD committee on observations of the state, but on how the state is implementing the UNCOPD. So highlighted some issues that we were doing well, and then also some issues that we are falling behind on. So it's just I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for.
Yeah. But you were using the public sector duty in kind of advancing your arguments around implementation of CRPD. Is that right?
Yes, yes,
yeah. Okay, thanks, Clive. That's a good example. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. So I think different types of experiences, some positive, some not so great. General thinking around, it can be used effectively in terms of accessing services. We can push for better access to user-friendly information, ensuring that. And then also that example from Paula around the urine sampling and how the public sector duty was used to good effect to create change in practice there. And also bearing in mind that the public sector duty isn't just about local authorities, it's about all public bodies. And that we need to remember that as well. So back to you, Anne, to introduce Jacqueline.
Yeah, and this is my fault. I should have just gone through the agenda for the day just before I did hand over to Jacqueline. So I'm going to remedially do that now, really quickly. So yeah, that's my fancy first slide. So just again to say that this is part of a package. We have 3 other themes, and there are still places available for the second and third workshop if people are interested in any of the others. So just in terms of what we're going to do for the rest of the day, I suppose what we've tried to do is get Jacqueline to give us the facts, the figure, the whole, the background to the public sector duty and how it can be used as a tool to ensure that bodies fulfill their legal obligations. And we'll have opportunities for questions and answers after Jacqueline speaks. Then we are going to have a break. We've scheduled it for half an hour, so hopefully we'll get a half an hour, because we do think that these Zoom meetings also need a break. And then we're going to try and bring you a practical example, and wearing slightly other hats. Myself and Rachel have been involved in work on the public sector duty in Galway City for a couple of years. So we're just going to give you an idea about what went on in relation to that work. And then more opportunities for questions and answers. And I think then one of the really important things about these sessions is there will be an opportunity for conversations in small groups on how to apply what we've learned. So a little bit around strategizing for how what we have heard can actually be used by people. So I am now going to hand over to Jacqueline to give us, I suppose, what is the keynote speech. And everybody, like most people know Jacqueline now anyway, at this stage, she's the Public Sector Duty Manager with IREC. She leads the Commission's work on supporting the effective implementation of the public sector duty within public bodies in Ireland. And before joining the Commission in 2017, Jacqueline worked for many years, and we all knew her then as well, in the non-government sector with national organisations focused on gender equality, migration, anti-racism and interculturalism. So over to you, Jacqueline.
Great, thanks. And I might just share slides then, if that's all right, because it's probably just easier to go through the duty that way. So I'll just do that now. Thanks very much. And thanks, Anne and Rachel, and thanks for inviting me here today. I always feel like when I come to these sessions that I'm just quite, I get asked great questions. So I already have been great observations already, so thanks very much. So I suppose like I'll just get straight into it because of time and everything. But apologies in advance if some of this is too basic for people, you know, but I'm just kind of going to, some people have a good knowledge and some people have less knowledge. So just to go through the basics. But with the public sector equality and human rights duty, it's contained in section 42 of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014. So it's been 7 years as part of Irish law and its legal obligation on public bodies. And it has existed in other jurisdictions, say, such as the UK and Northern Ireland for many years. So, and then it became part of Irish law. Then we took it into our kind of jurisdiction. But I suppose just to emphasize that we're the only country in Europe that has what people call a composite duty. So it's not just equality, but it's equality and human rights. And so that's kind of interesting from a European perspective. So what is the public sector equality and human rights duty? So in section 42, section 42.1, we kind of call it like the core obligation, you know, what the obligation is. And I'm going to actually just say it: a public body shall, in the performance of its functions, have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality of opportunity and treatment of its staff and the persons to whom it provides services, and to protect the human rights of its members, staff, and the person to whom it provides services. So just in this, like, say, core obligation on public bodies to have regard, okay, there is a few things I want to point out. One, it's a statutory obligation since 2014. It applies across all the functions of an organisation. It applies to public sector staff and service users. So it's a kind of an internal and external kind of element to the duty. And that it's a positive duty. It's requiring public bodies to not wait around for a complaint to be made or a case taken against them, but that they would just look at, okay, what are the kind of gaps we have here around equality and human rights, and what do we need to look at and work on? So it's about them becoming equality and human rights compliant. And just on the core obligation bit again, like if a public body is, like, say, making a decision or developing policies, new policies, for example, you know, that have regard element of section 42.1 is really important, because if they don't have regard, then there is, like, the potential that you know, there could you know, a party could take a judicial review against that particular public body. So that has been the case in the UK. It hasn't been tested in Ireland as yet, but it appears from that it may be a possibility to do so in the future. So that's why it's really important for public bodies to engage with this statutory obligation. And I suppose just on the proactive bit, it shouldn't be the burden on you know, people in very vulnerable situations to take cases to vindicate their rights or vindicate their equality rights as well. Like, it should be the state that would do so. So what do public bodies have to do? And I just wanted to kind of take up, I can't remember who said it exactly, in the session there, but public bodies are not just local authorities. Like there's actually a definition of public bodies in our founding legislation that I just mentioned there, IREC Act 2014. You know, it's across like government departments, state agencies, ETBs, universities. So it's a broad definition in our legislation. And so they're required to do three things. There's 3 steps. So assess, address, and to report. So first of all, to set out in their strategic plan an assessment of the human rights and equality issues it believes to be relevant to its functions and purpose, and to do so in a manner that's accessible to the public. So that's very important as well. We should be able to see that a public body has, you know, done an assessment, and so forth. And that also applies to the second step, which is address. So when they do the assessment, they have to also set out in their strategic plan the policies, plans and actions in place or proposed to be put in place to address those issues that have come up in the assessment, and to do so again in a publicly available way. Again, we should be able to follow all of this. So we know if a body is compliant or not by say looking at the website, looking at the strategic plan, looking at in the third step, annual reports. So in the third step, report, public bodies have to report on developments and achievements in relation to 1 and 2. Now, this is a very important point because I've noticed that, we've noticed a team here in IREC, tiny, small team, I might add, that people are reporting on stuff they're doing around equality and human rights in their organisation, which is also very, very welcome, but they haven't done an assessment. Like the reporting is reporting on the actions that have come out of the assessment. So it's actually not possible to report on the duty if you actually haven't done an assessment according to section 42. So that's something that we've been pointing out to public bodies, that the foundational step of assess is really, really important. Now, I'm going to go on a bit here, but that's kind of essentially what's in the public sector duty. But you might just say, like, why is this important in the Irish context? Well, it is, as I mentioned before, like it should be the state's responsibility. It is the state's responsibility to respect, protect and fulfill human rights in line with international commitments. And they need to be proactive in ensuring that all public bodies are human rights and equality compliant. And the duty as a catalyst for institutional reform is really, really important here because of that proactive, positive duty that I was talking about earlier on. It's like not waiting around for something to happen and be hauled up in front of like the WRC or whatever, but it's looking at being proactive so you can improve public services and then you can also improve workplaces as well. So that's the importance of it. So I mentioned earlier on about the strategic planning cycle, and this is very important because so that if it's in a strategic plan in a public body, then it will fall into annual work plans, and then it'll become part and parcel of how a public body mainstreams equality and human rights obligations into their daily work. So that's in section 42 to set out in your strategic plan, or they say however so subscribed. So in the case of local authorities, for example, it'd be a corporate plan, you know what I mean? But however sometimes people call them statements of strategy as well. So just on this point, like there has been some quite a bit of activity in this particular area. In the sense of, if I just mention two particular sectors of the local authorities and government departments. So local authorities, after the last local election, we did a bit of work with the Department of Housing to put the duty into the corporate planning guidelines for local authorities. And then because of that, actually nearly every single, not everyone, but nearly every single local authority referenced the duty in their corporate plan. Now, Now, some people maybe referenced the duty and said, we'll comply with our duty, and other local authorities like Meath County Council, for example, made more of a commitment of undertaking their assessment in the following year. So there was varying different degrees of reference. However, like as Section 42 says, you have to assess, address. So you have to set out your assessment and your action plan. So a reference to the duty is not compliance with the public sector duty, okay? However, I think from a civil society perspective, if there's a reference there and a commitment to undertake an assessment, that's a really interesting and good opportunity for civil society to say, okay, they've said in their, so I'll just pick one, for example, Fingal County Council, they've said they're going to do their assessment in the coming period, next 5 years in that corporate planning period. So there's an opportunity for organisations dealing with that local authority, civil society, to do some work with them around, well, we can inform your assessment, you know what I mean, with our lived experience or of particular issues. So that's why that strategic planning, the strategic plan is very important, just, from a civil society perspective, of seeing like what they're saying about the duty and can you utilise that a little bit. In addition, there's also government departments published their statements of strategy last year, and I think it was last year or the year before. No, it was last year. It was last year, early last year, and again there was varying degrees of reference to the duty. Not all the statements of strategies reference to duty actually, but of the ones that did, there was again maybe there's opportunities there for civil society to engage, although some departments, not many, but some departments actually complied with the duty with an assessment and an action plan. So I just wanted to give you an idea of that kind of activity that's going on and the importance of the strategic plan in the process. So across the functions, I mentioned this earlier on, that it's across the functions, and this is actually quite important in our monitoring of the duty as well, in that there's still a bit of work to be done with public bodies around, it's not just about service users, it's also about staff as well. So the internal and external kind of element of the duty. But it does apply to organisational planning and corporate services. So strategic planning, budget allocation, procurement and grant funding. And actually we've been doing like a fair bit of work with the Office of Public Procurement, Office of Government Procurement, sorry, the OGP, to put the duty into their national public procurement guidelines. Now on the OGP website just before Christmas, I think it was like just on Christmas Eve, if I remember correctly, or the day before, they have a human rights section on the OGP website, which clearly sets out that the public sector duty applies to public procurement, but they're also going to put it into the national public procurement guidelines as well for public bodies. So there's also human resources, so recruitment, HR policies and practices, and staff capacity building as well. It applies to service provision. If a public body has a function around research and policy, it also applies to that area. And then regulatory and oversight is also an area. So for example, like there are organisations like the Workplace Relations Commission, which is a regulatory body. So like say if they were making a decision on a particular case, like if they could reference the importance of implementation of the duty in those decisions, that would be very helpful in terms of a multiplier effect to public bodies in general. So it's just to say that this is so that a body can take a whole of organisation approach to equality and human rights, and it's not like the sole responsibility of a social inclusion unit, say within a public body, but it's across everybody. It's everybody's is mindful of the need to have regard to eliminating discrimination, promoting equality, and protecting human rights. So just to let you know that we actually produced a guidance. We've a fair bit of guidance, but this is the kind of core guidance. So this is I call the Bible. I look at this quite a bit, I have to say. So that was sent out to all public bodies in 2019. So going back to that thing of what people were saying, there's a low awareness of the duty within public bodies. So this was sent out to the head of every public body and the head of corporate services, and this is back in 2019. So obviously, you know, there is awareness that needs to take place at all different levels, but certainly the public bodies, if they didn't know about the duty before that, they certainly know, they formally were notified about it through this guidance. And again, it's assess, address and report, and our guidance, what it does is it goes through our recommended process about how a public body can implement the duty in an effective way. Because as you probably know yourself, you could, as a public body, you could sit down and do an assessment and go, there's no issues here, everything is great. We just give all our services regardless of background to everybody. But then when they sit down and actually do an assessment, you know, issues arise. So what we wanted to do was from pilots that we did with public bodies. We did five actually we can, which Paula mentioned earlier, around 6 pilots we did, and that informed the guidance and the approach. I won't go into that because that would take another 10 minutes, but there are pilot video case studies on our website if you're interested in having a look at them, because they're very interesting. So just I wanted to spend a bit of time on step 1 because it's about the assessment. So you remember when I was saying earlier on about that foundational step, which is assess, because if you don't do the assessment, you can't come up with the actions and then you can't report properly. So to be in compliance with your statutory obligation as a public body, you need this assessment piece. Is very, very important. And it's about, like, you know, sitting down and identifying the human rights and equality issues across your functions. And what we recommend to public bodies is to set up a cross-functional working group to undertake the assessment. And to do that as a form of a process as such, and just in the duty it is a self-assessment process, you know what I mean. So it is up to the public body how they do it, but we have recommended in our guidance that sort of working group, if you don't already have one in place, like some organizations have, like equality committees, for example, already established if they're big organizations like universities. But if you don't, it's highly recommended to set that up. And the focus of the assessment, and this will be very familiar to yourselves, is when you're doing your assessment, to be mindful of the people covered by the 9 grounds under the equality legislation. So you're looking at gender, civil status, family status, age, sexual orientation, disability, race, religion, and the traveller community. And also any human rights that pertain to the purpose and function of your particular public body. And with that, through that human rights lens, you can look at people at risk of poverty and social exclusion. Now, some of you might be aware that there's a review of the equality legislation going on at the moment, where there is a commitment in the programme for government for a socioeconomic ground, so an additional ground under the equality legislation. So, I mean, you know, that might also have to, so what we're kind of recommending to public bodies to be mindful of that commitment, and they may already start looking at that particular area of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion underneath the human rights kind of part of the duty. And then we're also mindful to say to public bodies, you need to be aware that people experience multiple forms of discrimination as well, and to be mindful of that when doing your assessment. So I think the one thing I would say, like, we did a review of our pilots with public bodies. And one of the things I remember the most about that review was the public bodies said it was actually the process that was the most important part of doing the public sector duty. So bringing people together, and what they realized was, like, there were known issues. You know, there's issues how we provide services, say, to people, to disabled people, for example. But then they also discovered many issues that were unknown. And I think that's the most important part of the public sector duty, the process by which a public body sits down and figures out, like, what are the really kind of priority issues for us with regard to human rights and equality. So I'm just gonna, like, sorry if Anne, I'm just gonna say, like, let me know if I'm going on too long, like, sorry, but I'm getting to the part now about civil society and the duty, if you know what I mean. So I hope I'm okay for time.
No, I think this is what people came to hear. Jacqueline, keep going.
Okay, grand. And just let me know if you need to cut me off, you know. So just one of the key messages of our guidance, as I mentioned earlier on, is evidence-based assessment. So we say to public bodies, you know, you have to take an evidence-based approach to undertaking your assessment. That's our recommendation, and we have been given a role in the legislation for guidance to public bodies. And one of the key things is we emphasize is consultation with staff and service users. And also with civil society organisations. So I've kind of bolded those two inside because that's very important, especially for ourselves here today. But also that they would look at data from the Central Statistics Office, reports and research from the ESRI or the Commission, and there's like huge, I'm just mentioning those, but there's huge kind of sources of research. There's cases taken to the Workplace Relations Commission as well that people could look at. So there's the wealth of evidence and information out there that public bodies are advised to tap into when they're doing their assess, that really important first step. And so just on that consultation bit and the role of civil society in supporting implementation of the public sector duty. So I'm just going to, so that's what I'm going to talk about now, like, because I've kind of covered like what the duty is and what public bodies are required to do. I suppose I'd end that part by saying, like, there is low compliance in the public sector. So that's, and I mean, we released our new strategic plan in February of this year, and the public sector duty is a strategic priority for us for the next 3 years. And it is because of that low compliance. Like, there's a lot, we've done a lot of awareness raising. I think there is a lot more awareness of the duty over the last years, but compliance remains low, and that's what we're going to be tackling over the next 3 years. And we would like to be partners with civil society in working in bringing up the level of compliance as well in the public sector. So just in terms of the consultative approach, we have, as a Commission, have key messages to public bodies. So first of all, that we say to consult with service users and staff at each of the 3 stages of assess, address and report, and to do so in a timely way. So like, say if a public body is going to do their strategic plan, that they would, right, this is the moment we're doing our public sector duty, we're doing our assess and address, the first 2 steps, because it's our strategic planning process is going on. And as part of that, we've read the IREC guidance. It says we have to consult with service users and staff. And so let's do that. We do it focus groups, we give ideas, we have a consultation tool on this that we produced in 2020. And it's about, like, whether you do like an inclusive focus group, whether you do a survey, but that consultation piece is very important. Now, just to say, that's not in the legislation. This is something that I pointed out before. It's not said in section 42, you must consult as part of your assessment. But we have it, but we have been given a role as guidance, and we have it in our guidance. So I just wanted to kind of say that because that's a kind of an important point. The second thing is that we say inclusive consultation with all identified groups. So really trying to get all groups together to have that consultation piece. And then inviting groups to give feedback on a draft assessment, draft action plan, and draft report as well. So you don't want to just do it for the assessment and the action plan, but say if you're doing your annual report as a public body, you want to say, well, let's go out and test with a group of service users as to, well, how have we done on progress and achievements? So it's and that's the kind of evidence-based approach that we have advocated in that consultation tool. And I have, by the way, I've links to all these guidance at the end of this presentation, so I'll show it to you later. So there are our key messages to public bodies. And then in terms of the civil society and the duty, and Paula might recognise this report just here, but I think that the pilot project we did with Surrey and Can, I wasn't involved in it like myself, it was previous people in the commission who were involved, Deirdre Toomey and Donal Rice, but it was just a very valuable project to kind of see, to bring out the potential of the duty for civil society organisations and rights holders. So civil society organisations could potentially use the duty to highlight equality and human rights issues in their engagement with public bodies. They can communicate rights holders' expertise and help with that evidence-based approach that I was talking about earlier on. And it's about, like, say, for example, if a civil society organisation, if you're doing like a policy submission, or you're doing an advocacy work, or you're having a meeting with a minister, or you've seen in a strategic plan that they intend to do their duty, writing a letter to that particular public body and say, we note in your strategic plan that you have committed to starting your public sector duty, and we would like to be involved in that, and even quoting IREC's guidance on the importance of consultation with rights holders. So I mean, I'm just throwing out some ideas there, by the way. Like, we can discuss this more later, but I really like what in the commission, what we see is, like, we can monitor the duty, and obviously we have an enforcement power around the duty as well. But because we're a very small organisation, like small team anyway, that ourselves, like there's 3 of us on the team here at IREC, that we can, there's a lot of public bodies out there. So yeah, we do need to partner with other organisations in order to monitor compliance with the duty. And I suppose just on a last point there, going back to what I said earlier on, like in the UK, civil society have used the duty also in judicial review proceedings as well. So there actually has been a body of case law that has developed in the UK around now in the UK it's have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination. So it's slightly different in the Irish context is to have regard. So we still have to develop that, probably our own case law around that ourselves. But I suppose just to say, like in the UK, civil society use the duty. Also say, for example, if a public body makes a decision to say stop funding a particular, they stop a funding stream, for example, and it has a particularly damaging effect on a particular community, that has been challenged in judicial review proceedings in the UK, and the public body has been found in breach of their duty and has had to restore the funding. Now, and by the way, I'm not saying about every case, but it's obviously dependent on the case, but it has been used quite a lot to that effect in the UK, and it could potentially be used in the Irish context, but it hasn't been, as I said, it hasn't been tested as yet. So the community, I just wanted to mention, I don't need to actually go through this because Paula has talked about it perfectly just at the beginning there of our session. But just to say that that Saria and Can worked with us to look at the human rights issues affecting service users when accessing drug treatment services. And I think this was a fantastic project where rights holders engaged directly with the Department of Health and the HSC, using the public sector duty to say, your practices, say around urine supervision of urine sampling, is contrary to the rights of dignity, you know, of service users. So it was I think it was a very stark case. Obviously, there's still outstanding issues, as Paula said, around still the overuse of urine sampling to monitor. But I still think that it gave an idea of how the duty can be used. And the video case study of this is actually on our website as well, and also the publications from that project are available, I think, on the CAN Community Action Network website. Might also even be on our website now, I'm not 100% sure, but the video case study is on our website. So if you have time to look at it, I'd highly recommend you to look at that. It's about 10 minutes now, so I may not play it, but just talk a bit more about our grant scheme, which is actually quite important, because Fidelma will kill me if I don't mention the grant scheme.
Just 5 more minutes, Jacqueline.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
Grand.
So that's great, because I'm just right on time then, Anne. So I just wanted to highlight that the grant scheme was launched very recently. And we have a grant scheme to fund civil society organisations only. But one of the strands, there's 2 strands, and one of the strands is dedicated to supporting compliance with the public sector duty. So as to help us meet our strategic priority 5 about to encourage, report on and enforce compliance of public bodies with the duty. So just to say, like in the grant application, it actually states here, I actually won't even read it because I've actually talked to you about it. It's really about what I was saying there about raising awareness of the duty with public bodies, monitoring public bodies' compliance, capturing rights holders' experience, and supporting public bodies to take an evidence-based approach, and utilising the duty to advance the human rights and equality issues of rights holders. So the deadline for grant applications is Wednesday, 18th of May, at 3 p.m. Fidelma said don't leave it until that day of Wednesday, 18th of May at 2 p.m. to start sending the application, because sometimes there issues can arise. But just to encourage people here, and please spread the word that that there is this strand, and really what we're looking for is projects to support public bodies really taking that evidence-based approach or raising awareness of the duty with public bodies. But more information on that, it's best to go to grants@irec.ie for more information on that, and it's also on our website as well. So I hope that's okay, but ask me questions about it if afterwards. And then finally, the Commission's role in relation to the duty. I've already kind of mentioned this already, but we have guidance and support, and then we have the suite of guidance that I've mentioned earlier on, but also where we can issue guidelines or codes of practice. And actually we're in the middle of the beginning to work on a code of practice for public bodies on the public sector duty. So that's a big task for us this year, which I'm quite excited about myself on doing that code of practice. And also that if a public body decides not to do their, doesn't do their public sector duty, we can ask them to do their public sector duty. But we also in IREC have other enforcement powers. I think, for example, Paula mentioned the equality review. We can also use, say, the equality review under section 42 of our Act to support implementation of the duty as well. So we do have that enforcement power. And then that's the suite of guidance. I won't go through it because I'll give you these slides afterwards, Anne and Rachel, if it's okay to circulate it to people afterwards. And then we have the links of the different resources. And that's it. There's all the resources there. But I mean, I'm really happy to, I think always of these things, the interesting is discussion is in the questions and comments from people. So I'll just leave it there before I confuse you even more. So I'll stop sharing now if that's okay. Thank you.
No, I think the opposite of confusion, Jacqueline. I think you always bring clarity to what can be, you know, kind of a difficult thing to get our heads around. So thank you so much for that. And just to say, we will be compiling the presentations after today's session. But in addition to that, we intend to develop a guide for each of the teams. So starting with the guide on the public sector duty, which will be a bit around, you know, what we've heard today, a bit about links to resources and other things. So you'll have them all in one place, which is, I think, yeah, you know, can be very useful sometimes. So I am just for maybe 10 minutes, just if there are questions, just throwing it open to questions directly for Jacqueline. Lisa, is that your hand, I see?
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, this might be an obvious question, Jackie, but like in the process of that assess, address and report, like all of this is done internally within the public body. So say like I work in Kildare County Council, I know there was a review in terms of traveller accommodation, I think done with Kildare County Council, but like they would do that piece themselves and then publish it. Like, is there external audits or is there anybody else that kind of participates in that process, or is that all just internal?
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. So first of all, just to say, the assessment has to go across all the functions. So just to say, because sometimes people think like it's just one part. Say you mentioned the traveller bit, but it's across all the functions of an organisation. So looking at HR and service provision and so forth. But it is an internal process in the sense that we recommend that a cross-functional working group comes together and undertakes an assessment, because essentially, like saying Kildare County Council, you're the experts on the work that you do. You know what I mean? Like, and what we found with public bodies is when you went in, people knew what the issues were. But it was about just getting people together and just identifying what the issues were and then prioritizing what the issues were for the next period, because actually a lot of issues come up for people. So but in terms of the external part, I would say the external part is the consultation that we recommend public bodies to do. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't, I don't think you can really do the assessment in a kind of holistic and effective way if you don't do the consultation piece. So the consultation with staff and service users to ensure that you're really getting to the crux of the equality and human rights issues. But apart from that, it's essentially an internal process. And we have started actively monitoring. Now we have been monitoring always, but we're doing much more systematic monitoring over the coming year, where we'll be looking at, say, Kildare County Council, we'll be looking at your website, looking at your strategic plan and your annual reports and seeing, okay, have they done their public sector duty? So that's the, I suppose, the external monitoring piece that's going to be going on.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. I always hate this bit, but I am just conscious of time and getting people time to get a cup of coffee. In some instances as well, probably rare as hen's teeth. When a public sector body has done the overall assessment, they have given it over to civil society to have a look at and to make comments and recommendations on. So we've had a direct experience of that. But as I said, that's probably rare as hen's teeth. Can I just get a sense of, if people do have a question, if you can put your hands up now so I can just get a sense of judging time. And I know, Fiona, you're first to, you're next with your hand up.
Yeah, and I think Jacqueline and I brought this up before. So human rights and equality in regard to disabled people. So, for example, the HSC is a public body. They provide services to the public. So, for example, you know, we have an awful lot of difficulty getting the HSE to protect the human rights of disabled people in the context of living independently or getting personal assistance services to support them to live the life they want. And it's a constant battle, and it's only getting worse. So, in regard to our human rights, you know, so Clive spoke about the UN COPD, and we've signed up for that. So, but there's a constant battle, you know, to kind of identify what is and what is not human rights.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and Fiona, are you think like what can you do to make that more effective, that engagement?
Yeah, yeah, because there's no one system that fits every CHO area. And I'm sure this is not elite for disabled people either, you know, but like, it's like their body and they're in charge, you know, and human rights and equality really doesn't factor in to the provision of services that they offer.
Yeah, and I think the point, Fiona, is that, you know, whilst it's one organisation, it's quite fragmented, and you could say the same about the ETBs, for example. Yeah. I don't know, do you have a solution or a suggestion around that, Jacqueline?
This is still a very evolving space around that kind of thing, but I feel like one of the things I think when I deal with public bodies is they feel, especially with an organization as big as the HSC, which is like huge, you know what I mean, like and some departments are huge, like social protection as well, for example. So I mean, it's and I think that like if they're doing an assessment and an action plan, and I think I said this to you, Fiona, maybe when I was chatting to you before, is like, you know, the more particular you can be about like what the issue is for yourselves, and then present like a proposed action with it, that they can feel like, okay, we can adopt this into our assessment and action plan, the better. The problem is sometimes there's a lot of issues coming out for civil society, even like say in the disability area. You know, it's not just one action, there could be like 10 actions for just that particular HSC, but it's trying to say like, okay, what is the kind of particular priority for yourself that you want to advance, and then see if you can get an action with it. I know it was similar, like say, I don't know if Paula, are you still there? But I know it was similar with Saria, because they had a lot of issues, but it was trying to kind of zone in on one particular one that was like really pertinent, and trying to see if they could eliminate that practice of supervision. You might have something on that, Paula, because I know there was a good few issues.
Yeah, we had a lot of issues. Like there was a lot of findings, you know, and through the surveys that we did, and there was a lot about like people having individual care plans, you know, like, because common practice within drug treatment services, particularly in opioid, you know, substitute treatment, is people can be on it for 20 odd years and barely ever get to have a proper, you know, like proper checkups, you know, regular checkups with the doctor. Like we've talked to people who've been on clinics for 10 years, and other than the initial assessment, has never been called in for any other health checks, other than like now and again, if they request screening for hepatitis C.
Was the issue then having to hone in on one? Sorry, Paula, was your challenge then honing in on one
exactly,
issue to fight for? Yeah,
that was the one that was really, really degrading people's human rights, and particularly when you consider that past trauma has a huge part in people becoming problematic in their drug use. And for some people, it's sexual abuse. So they felt like they were being re-traumatized every time they went into a toilet and being asked by yet another person to pull down their underwear. Do you know, so it was degrading, and that was the one that we knew that we could tackle on a human rights level, you know, that would really, really show the discrimination compared to other people going for treatment for anything else and not having to produce a urine sample just to get that treatment. So we were able to use that.
Is the hope then that that kind of snowballs? So, you know, you kind of set that parameter and hope that it snowballs from there, and you create a more of awareness of the impact of these types of, okay, that's really,
that was the hope,
really
you know, that eventually the other issues can come on, you know, then like we still are doing a lot of work within it.
And I think in the disabled space, the proliferation of the DPOs in each area where people can be, you know, giving the same message from loads of different people in loads of different areas is a real strength, and it's a real strength of the ILMI approach, I think. Rachel, did you have a question?
Thanks. Yeah, Jacqueline, just in terms of the information around, so you were saying a number of local authorities have said that they're, you know, they've referenced the duty, or there might be other state agencies who've made a commitment to doing something. But do you have that information that you could share so that everybody doesn't have to go, what have the HSE said? What have the...
We're just starting that work, Rachel, of just like, I mean, we would have monitored a number of key sectors like local authorities and things, but we wanted to do it in a more kind of structured, systematic way, similar to like the equivalent of ourselves in the UK, but we will be publishing compliance statistics.
Okay.
We just have to set up the system. we are in the middle of doing that.
And would that cover just commitments to doing something? You know, the referencing bit.
It will. We have to kind of work that out yet, Rachel. Like, we're still at too early a stage to say that. So say, for example, so if you are working in a particular area, so say somebody hears from Kildare, that you would go to Kildare County Council's strategic plan and see what they have said here. So it is quite ad hoc at the moment until we have that, but I'm not sure. But that's something that it's good to bear in mind, actually, Rachel, like, because as I said, we're just developing and we're looking at it from compliance with the duty. So have they published their assessment in a strategic plan? But whether we report on you know, a reference to the duty, that we haven't developed that as yet. Sorry, I don't have the information.
Could be a tool, you know, could be a tool for civil society.
Well,
you know.
yes, because it's I do understand the information gap you're talking about there, so that at least if people had the information, they could see it. And sorry, I just wanted to go back to Fiona's question again, just sorry, because I know that Paula had answered a bit of it there but I was also going to say, like, it also depends on how you engage with a public body as well. Like, I think it would be very useful to write or have correspondence with a public body, you know, because you can have, say, like, where you might ring up or you might engage in a meeting or something like that. But sometimes I know that in the UK, like, civil society were quite formal in their engagements with public bodies around, like, requesting by letter or by email a meeting in the context of the public sector duty, for example. So Fiona, maybe you've done that already, and that's great, but it was just something that just occurred to me, even when Paula was talking just there, because of, you know, Paula, the engagement you would have had with meetings with the HSE, but there was also correspondence as well that went with those meetings, you know.
I suppose, Jackie, it's just like, how do we define human rights and equality? And that's for every person, you know, within Ireland, whether they're disabled or non-disabled. So what does that mean, though, in the context of individual people?
I think though that they're fairly well set out, you know, what human rights and equality. So maybe it's just about reminding ourselves what they are. But you're right, Fiona, they can be interpreted differently, you know, by various bodies when they want to use it as a tool to do nothing. Yeah, Laurie, last question then from Laurie.
It's just a very brief one. It's just, you had mentioned there about the consultative approach not being in section 14.2. Is there a plan for that to perhaps be re-looked at? Or, you know, it's when you said about the timely way, that it has to happen in a timely way. Is there anything?
Is that part of the review of the equality legislation that's also ongoing, Jacqueline?
Well, it's now in the review of the quality legislation, it's really focused on the Employment Equalities Act and the Equal Status Act. So there's quite a lot in our submission on the changes to that. But just in terms, like in our statement of strategy, I mentioned that the duty is a priority, and in that we have committed to, over the next 3 years, looking at a review to conduct a review of section 42. Obviously that review of section 42 it's actually contained in section 42 that we can ask the minister for a review, so it's actually part of it. So in the context of that, as a review, certainly that consultation piece is something that potentially could be part of that review. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can we? The whole point of the review is to strengthen section 42. Now the enforcement power in section 42 is not a very strong one in a sense. I know that has been said to us quite a lot by civil society and other actors. So that's one part of it, but also there are maybe other elements such as that a consultation piece. So that's something that will happen over the next couple of years. So yeah, I am very conscious of that, because that comes up a lot in my engagement with civil society about it's a shame that consultation isn't embedded in section 42. But having said that, I don't know about the review now, so I can't commit to that or anything like that.
I suppose the reason just to add to that is just that I think a lot of consultational strategies happens online at the moment. So there are a lot of participatory democracy groups thinking that doesn't happen anymore, and this had started to be a trend before the pandemic even, but without that kind of local engagement at a community level into strategies and into action plans to happen, I suppose in local development and local community development structures and county councils, etc., you don't get the buy-in from the public.
Indeed. Indeed, and you don't get improvements to policy either.
No.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Jacqueline, and so much and thank you so much for your engagement in terms of the questions. We are going to take a break now, just to give people a breather. Jacqueline is staying with us, is that right?
I want to see your presentation. Yours and Rachel's.
Geez, no pressure then. So it is now 13:35. I would suggest we take a 20-minute break. Is that okay with people? And so we'll be back to start about 5 to 2. We'll start on the dot then. Okay, so we'll see you in 20 minutes then. Hi, everybody. This is Rachel. Just going to see if she's having a problem.
No, it's okay. I'm not. I was just ringing to see if I would share the slides or you for our bit.
I have it up. It might be better for you to do it, I think, because you're doing this first. Okay, so you do it. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Did you at least get a cup of tea?
Just about to fill the cup.
Feel free to keep eating the sandwich or whatever it is. You know, that's what we do if we were in a meeting.
Yeah.
Keep all of this very informal.
So will
we seem to have lost. Oh, there she is. I thought I couldn't see Jacqueline there for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so will we just continue on?
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose the second part of today is just to give you kind of a practical example of work that went on in a local area that was focused on using the public sector duty as a tool. And it's something both myself and Rachel have been involved in for quite a few years, wearing different hats. At the time, I was working in I suppose an organisation in Galway City, and Rachel was working with us to do this work. So I'm just going to give you a sort of really quick background to what brought us to the Equality and Rights in Action project. And Rachel is going to take us through the project. She was the coordinator of the project. She's going to take us through what we actually did then. So if we just go on there for a sec, Rachel, to the first one. Okay, so I suppose there was the whole area of equality and human rights niggled a few of us in Galway City for quite a while. And there were there's some very good organisations in Galway City, and ourselves in the PPN at the time, Galway City Community Network, which is a PPN that's independent of the local authority. And I suppose for this work that was very important. Galway City Partnership and Galway Traveller Movement sort of put our heads together quite a number of years ago now and thought to ourselves, you know, we really have to start using the public sector duty as a tool. And one of the reasons we believed that is because we think it is critical to the community, voluntary and environmental groups and organisations concerned with equality, human rights and social inclusion. And I think in terms of our overall observations of why this was important and how to go about it, we really did feel that cross-sectoral collaboration was very important. So whilst we weren't working for the local authority or the ETB or any other public bodies, we worked very well with them. We also felt that participation was very necessary for a robust and authentic process, which eventually led us to the establishment of the civil society panel that Rachel will speak about. And we also thought that values created the conditions for a common language, and we took a value-based approach. And the first thing that any of us did was sit down and thrash out on a cross-sectoral basis what values unite us, what values that are pertinent to human rights and equality unite us. And we found this to be a common language across sectors, even with Intrio, you know, that we were able to speak about common values. Putting them into practice now might be a different thing, but the individuals involved were able to speak that language. We also found that that was a catalyst, but that it doesn't happen automatically. It needs to be a conscious exercise. So that was the basis for us taking on some work in this area. So if you go on to the next one. So there's been 3 stages to date to the work on the public sector duty in Galway City. The first thing that we did was the development of a statement. And we did this on a citywide cross-sectoral basis. So we brought together all of the groups from civil society that would have had in any way an engagement in this area, and we brought together the public bodies, or those that would engage with us anyway. And we sat down and we developed an equality and human rights statement. And that set out what we meant by the values that we identified, what we meant by them, so values such as dignity, equality, etc., what we meant by them and what they would look like in practice. in the work of all of the various not only public bodies, because I suppose we extended it to ourselves as community work organisations as well. Then building on that, what we aimed to do for this part of the work was to make it not easy, because it's not easy, but easier or more accessible for public bodies to start to implement the public sector duty and to fulfill their obligations. So the next thing we did was we put together a tool to support the implementation of the public sector duty. And it really went through the different stages. And just before I go any further, just to acknowledge the work of Neil Crowley, who worked with us on these first two stages. To put together what were tools to enable public sector bodies to begin to understand that this is an obligation, this is not a choice, but also to make it as accessible as possible for them to do it. The first part of the work was actually funded by the City Council. The second part of the work was funded by IREC, and we felt this was important for the project's credibility. And it also supported a number of public sector organisations to begin the process of implementation. And before I hand over to Rachel to go through the third part, which built on this, there were a couple of wins in relation to those first two bits, which was focused on the public bodies themselves. So, for example, a number of public bodies engaged with the work. GRETB, which is the ETB in our area, for example, undertook an overall assessment of their obligations, and they also invited us as civil society to review that overall assessment. There was an assessment of the LECP implementation plan. We developed a new implementation plan for the LECP because the first one was really bad. So we reviewed that LECP implementation plan. Galway City Partnership underwent an assessment, even though they didn't have to. They underwent an assessment of their human rights and equality obligations, and they changed their practice because of that. And then we were also asked to review the Galway City Arts Strategy. When we said we were asked, we asked them to ask us, basically, and it took over a year to get us there. But at the end of the day, we were asked to review the arts strategy. Now, just to go back to something Jacqueline said at the start, Galway City Council never did that overall assessment. So when they asked us to review their Galway City Arts Strategy, that was something that we sat down and we discussed, because we were asked to review a strategy which was a subcomponent of Galway City Council without Galway City Council having done the overall assessment. And there were lots of conversations between myself, Rachel, and Neil Crowley, between loads of different people, to would we actually do it? And in the end, we decided to do it because we felt that at least this was sort of incremental change and incremental progress. And changes were made to that strategy as a result of the review. And then towards the end, and I'm sure Rachel will mention this as well, but towards the end, just to focus on the public bodies, towards the end of the Equality and Rights in Action project, we had also garnered the interest of the university, GMIT, which is now the Atlantic University or something like that, and also the main hospital in Galway. So we had begun to garner the interest of other institutions as well. And then when we came to the end of these first two stages of the overall, it's a long pathway, but the overall of these two stages of the project, which focus on the public bodies, we thought we now need to flip the coin, and we now need to focus on civil society and to develop the capacity within civil society, both to advocate for and to engage with these processes. And that's where the Equality and Rights in Action project comes in. We were successful in our application to IREC for further funding for the third part of the initiative, and Rachel came on board as coordinator, and she's going to bring us through what we did with that project now.
Thanks, Anne. So the aim of the project, and I suppose it started about 18 months ago, maybe a bit more, this part of the process. So the aim of it, this time we were very much focusing on rights holders and civil society, and looking at what supports and resources and tools does civil society need to be able to engage in this public sector duty process and to be kind of agents of change and agents of supporting implementation. So the aim of it really was about building collective capacity and engagement of rights holders in the city to support the implementation of the duty. So the focus was on them. That was the task. And the process then was around trying to kind of develop an innovative model for rights holder participation in the implementation of the duty, to enable a participative evidence-based approach, as Jacqueline mentioned, to implementation of each of the key steps: assess, address, and report. So we had our eye to all of the different stages there. So there were 5 objectives to the project. As I mentioned, the first was building collective capacity and confidence and solidarity amongst a group of rights holders in the city who were covered, you know, under the 9 grounds plus 1. The other was to support and mentor rights holders, to engage in implementation, to raise the profile of the duty was the third objective amongst duty bearers. The fourth was about kind of providing, if you like, a service and seeing ourselves as being there for state agencies when they're trying to implement the duty. So we're the civil society group that they come to, you know, when they're doing their assessment, when they're doing their consultation, they talk to us, not just to us, but they do talk to us, and more formally then around the assessment. So that we would be kind of, I suppose, a grouping that they could come to, and then to ensure a project legacy of an established panel, civil society panel of duty bearers. So they were our kind of core objectives. And then the steps that we took were we set up a civil society panel, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we provided training to the civil society panel. They met very regularly and were very, very committed to this. And we did a lot of training with that panel, and we produced support materials and a resource tool, which I'll show you in a sec, or talk about in a sec. We established a collaborative forum, which was really about bringing together state agencies so that they themselves could engage in the process and support each other. So it was about bringing together state agencies who'd done some work on the duty, others who hadn't, but were thinking about it. So that collaborative forum piece is important. And then, as Anne said, we identified a few public agencies to work with: GRETB, Galway City Arts Office. And we also had, at the end of the project, started to talk to Galway University Hospital, and GMIT, Galway Mayo Institute of Technology, around how they could move forward with this. So I suppose the main piece of the work was the civil society panel. So we recruited people that represented the 9+1 grounds, and they were linked into representative organizations for the most part. But it was very important to us that we had people with lived experience on the panel. And a lot of work went into supporting them, went into talking to them on the phone, really bringing people with the process. And we, you know, at the end of the project, people really wanted to stay on as the civil society panel and are very keen to continue with the work, which is good. So we did training with the civil society panel, and just, I think, was it Fiona talking about what's equality, what's human rights? We discussed all of those things. What do we mean by equality? What do we mean by human rights? We, you know, like, we developed sort of modules and sessions that we did on human rights and equality. As well as Jacqueline came down and did an input for us, like on the duty itself and all of that. But then we had to work out, what do we mean by human rights and equality? We shared a lot of that. We did sessions where the civil society different members of the civil society panel would talk to their issues, be it transgender, the use of pronouns. We had a conversation on that whole she, her kind of use of pronouns piece, because people were like, why have you got that on your, you know, on your name tag, on your Zoom name tag? And we got into big discussions about that, on disability, on issues for travellers, because we knew that the civil society panel, if they were doing assessments, raising issues on this in relation to disability shouldn't just be left up to the disability person, or traveller issues shouldn't just be left to the traveller, so that if they're not at the table, the issues are raised by everybody else. And if they are there, they're also raised by everybody else. So we did a lot of those kind of issues affecting rights holders. And then we did the public sector duty itself, and how to apply that duty to policies and plans and strategies. So that was the training. Then that was the civil society panel. So some of ways that we worked was in terms of assessment. We actually did some mock assessments. So we had Neil Crowley down, kind of pretending that he was a local authority person and pretending that we were doing an assessment with them. And we role played that out with him. And we did another one where I think I was the local authority person, and we role played that out with me. And we did some real assessments, as we said. We actually did the GRETB. We engaged as a civil society panel looking at their the GRETB equality and human rights assessment. That was torture, I have to say. And we learned a lot from it because it was so hard. And we've kind of worked out that there's a simpler way of doing this. It can't be rocket science, but we were all a bit mithered, I think it's fair to say, by the end of the GRETB one. So we did track the learning, and we talked a lot about what we learned from doing those assessments. We produced a video of our experience with the voices of the civil society panel on it, and Neil Crowley speaking, and it's just a kind of a user-friendly video. And we produced a toolkit. That's it there on the right. It's a grassroots approach to the public sector equality and human rights duty, a resource from experience. And in here, we include everything that we did in the project, really. We also include links in here to the presentations and all the slides that we used in the training and the presentations that we gave in the training. They're all in there in that resource, which we'll send you the link to. So we convened the collaborative forum. There's a lot of work still to be done with that collaborative forum to support implementation of the duty. But it is an important space, and it's important that civil society are supporting it and are assisting it, and because it also, I suppose, it raises the profile of civil society as having a role to play in terms of the implementation of the duty. And then at the end, we had a project seminar where we launched our video and our toolkit, and Sinead Gibney from IREC came down, spoke, well, didn't come down, zoomed in, as we all did, and spoke. And where this is at now is this partnership that came together at the beginning has actually received funding from the Department of Rural and Community Development to do a few pieces around the local economic and community planning process. And one of the pieces of work under that project will be to support the civil society panel in doing assessments in relation to the local economic and community plan. So they'll be fully engaged in that. And so that's an important piece. And of course, we'll be applying, or that partnership will be applying to IREC for the 18th, 17th of May, Jacqueline, not at 3 o'clock on the 18th of May. So to try
to heads up there. I'm not involved.
Yes, Jacqueline,
so I'm not involved.
It's not me this time, but they will be doing that. So no, but like that was, so there's just a few lessons then things that we kind of really noticed. We learned a lot from the whole thing, so we agreed that the civil society panel was the way to go in terms of a model to kind of build that momentum, build a platform of people. We learned that training and capacity building is absolutely essential, and building solidarity and a sense of connection with each other amongst the panel, and everybody feeling a bit confident that they know what the duty is and what their role is with regard to it. We also figured that numbers didn't matter on the panel. We had, I think, 12, but the most important thing is that the grounds are represented, that they're actually there, that people are there. And that's, because a lot of people on the panel, some had been involved in stuff before and some hadn't. So we were trying to bring everyone up to some kind of a level playing pitch in terms of knowledge and confidence. We also, because the panel were involved in so many meetings, sessions, trainings, conversations, we couldn't, and because most of them were volunteers, not paid in their work to be there, we had to figure out a way to reimburse them for their time, and we did that through vouchers, which we were allowed to do and got permission from IREC to do that, and we'll be doing that again with this next round of funding, because you just can't ask people to give the time needed without giving some level of reimbursement. And because we were doing it all on Zoom, we sent them out like tea and vouchers for tea and coffee in different places, and we did all that, but then gave them a more significant voucher at the end of the project. And it's just about recognizing people's time, and it wasn't much, it wasn't going to change anyone's life, but it was about valuing their time and making sure everybody knew that. Another learning for us was to make sure to have any documentation that we have to look at in time for us all to read it and to come up with our position and our collective representations back. That also takes work and it takes time. We learned that we need to seek follow-up meetings or ask for documents back to make sure our concerns were incorporated. So we did that, like with the arts strategy in particular. We kept following them up. Have you got what and we saw and were able to track the changes in the art strategy that we asked to be made. Start small was the other one. We were really quite kind of uncertain because, as Anne said, Galway City Council didn't have an assessment. And then we're going in doing something on the art strategy. And I was saying, but they don't have an assessment. So what are we doing? But we came to the conclusion that we're trying to build a culture of awareness and understanding within state agencies now. So we can't wait for them to do their next strategic plan. We have to use opportunities that are there and go into them, talk about the public sector duty, look at whatever they're doing and try and link it to the public sector duty, raise our equality and human rights concerns on whatever it is they're doing. So for example, when we spoke to Galway, the hospital, and we spoke to like one of the senior managers in the hospital, which was brilliant because she's involved in community stuff herself already in Galway. So we kind of knew her, but they're building a new radiation therapy center in the hospital. And she was saying, how do we, like, even just that particular project, how do we bring an equality and human rights dimension into that? So we started kind of trying to thrash that out. But again, it's just about building, for us anyway, maybe rightly or wrongly, and I'm sure we're doing it the wrong way around, but we didn't feel we had any choice. We were just grabbing at any opportunity we could to bring in the public sector duty and to use it as a tool in that way. But it doesn't fit with the proper process of assess, address, report in that way. But we did question whether we should be doing it or not, these small little plans and strategies. But our assessment is that we should, because it helps to bring our own skills up. It helps us to just to get practice, if you like, doing smaller things. And then it gives us a bit of ammunition to go to them again when they are doing their full strategic plans to say, look, we've been engaging with you on this already. Can we now engage with you in the bigger strategic planning process? Jacqueline, you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, just on that point, actually, Michelle, and I didn't kind of say it, but obviously there's the strategic plan and there's the assess, address, report. But remember that the core obligation is to have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality and protect human rights. Right. That they have to have in their daily work. So if they are developing, say, that unit in the hospital that you mentioned, and they're developing that, and I remember I was saying about like making a decision or developing a practice or policy or service, for example, a new service, that you would have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality, protect human rights. And that's where the work that you're doing is very valuable, because that's still related to the public sector duty.
Yeah, and it's like I suppose the workaround that we were talking about, urine sampling and stuff like that, that was a very specific thing as well. But just trying to build up that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're trying to build up that really important relationship with a public body where they feel that you've got the expertise that you can lend to when they get around to their big assessment in their strategic plan. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. So just that bottom up approach nearly. And then we learned that there's a lack of awareness of the duty amongst some public bodies, and that civil society has a key role to play in changing that. And we also learned during the time the review of the Equality Acts was happening. So, in Community Work Ireland, we did a submission on it calling for stronger sanctions there as well. And then just the last ones here, collaboration and support for the public sector bodies is important, and the collaborative forum can be a useful space there. Civil society panels need to be, and collaborative forums have to be resourced and supported, because this cannot happen without funding. It just can't happen without funding. And then we were saying that it was good. It's good if a non-statutory body takes kind of control of the situation for coordination, because again, it raises the profile of the role of civil society in the whole process. So that was our learning, and that was the project. So does anyone have any questions or comments or anything?
We might just take a few questions before we break up. Jacqueline?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. You know, when you were saying, Rachel, about the LECP process, and there was funding given from the Department of Rural and Community Development to that and the duty. So I'm just also aware that the department, so I forget now the strategy that sorry, it's just kind of gone out of my head, but there is a strategy that they launched before COVID. You probably know the name of it, where there's actually an objective around the public sector duty and strengthening community and voluntary sector on the duty and so forth. And I was just wondering, is there like a funding stream attached to that? Because I'm just thinking about, you know, say if people wanted to get in, the community and voluntary sector wanted to get involved in the duty and raising awareness and all of that, is there funding from the Department of Rural and Community Development for that work? And certainly in IREC's engagement with the department, we can have those conversations with them as well. Maybe I just wonder, is there further funding there? Is a question really.
This is just to clarify about.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, inclusive and empowered communities, and it's this 5-year strategy. Most people here probably know it, and there is an objective around promoting and advancing the public sector duty amongst the community and voluntary sectors. So it's in there, but there isn't a specific budget. And oftentimes you end up with the department saying, well, that's really IREC's job, because this is a cross-departmental strategy. But like, I think there is scope. However, because it's there, I think it would be really good for IREC to meet DRCD and to talk to them about how that part of the strategy could be supported by DRCD, because at the end of the day, all government departments should be supporting this. And I think it would be really helpful from our perspective if that conversation was had. With regard to the funding
Can I clarify that one, Rachel?
Yeah.
So because I'm on the subgroup. So sustainable, inclusive and empowered communities has a number of subgroups that work on various different issues. And just to say that that reference to the public sector duty in that strategy is as a result of myself and Rachel fighting to get one. Fighting is too strong a word, but making sure that it was in there. It wasn't the department proactively putting it in there. It was us advocating for it to be put in there. But the current round of funding is not an open. Well, it was open. So the department identified funding from the Dormants Accounts Fund, and they sent out an express. So this is in the context of the new LECP plans that everybody will know about. And they sent out an expression of interest to all LCDCs, in other words, all local authorities, to give an expression of interest to undertake a pilot programme to include marginalised communities in the consultation and engagement process in developing the new LECP, but ultimately going on to other decision-making structures as well. So 4 were selected. I'm on the subcommittee, but we actually weren't told who the 4 were. I do know that Galway City was one. So it's not funding to support civil society panels or funding to support the implementation of the public sector duty in LECPs. It just so happens that the Galway City one was framed around that, because of the experience of having the civil society panel within Galway City. So you might have the other 3 with no reference to the public sector duty, although I hope they do. But it might be the case that they don't. Now, the idea is that each local authority would learn from the experience of this 4 pilots. So I think it's particularly welcome that Galway City has built on its work to date and will share their learning with other LCDCs, other local authority areas. But it's not, it wasn't as deliberate as it might seem to embed the public sector duty in LECP planning. It wasn't. It just so happened that the Galway one built on the experience to date. But it's something I do think we've been saying for a while.
Some of the funding will go to the civil society panel, so it will serve that purpose of building the panel further, you know. But just to say, the objective in the strategy is to strengthen and build understanding and capacity to meet public sector duty obligations in local government. So they're very much focused on local government, and community and voluntary organisations. But they do talk about then the actions are around toolkits, supporting capacity in community and voluntary sector organisations, providing supports to public bodies, all of that. And IREC and DRCD are named as the lead.
We were named and as lead, but I think we clarify with the department that was just in a more supportive role rather than lead, because I don't think we were actually approached about that. I wasn't involved in that particular bit, but anyway, but it's okay. There's no issue, like, you know what I mean, but it probably isn't more a lead. I think it's probably more appropriate for the department to lead and us to support, really.
But it is it's about funding as well, and it's like whoever's leading, it is about funding for the sector and support for the sector. So how that happens, I don't know, but like it would be good if you had a conversation with them, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would just say about the like the department themselves are actually doing their public sector duty themselves, their assessment and action plan at the moment. It might be just useful for you to know that, because they made a commitment to do it in their statement of strategy last year.
Who's leading out on that?
I actually don't know who's leading out on that, but I can find out for you and let you know. But I know that they're currently doing it, and this year, so it might be useful maybe to you know, about that, like say the role of civil society in the duty and stuff. It might be useful to explore that with them. And
how are they going to engage with civil society?
I don't know the ins and outs of that at all, like, but it might be useful. But anyway, I'll find out who the person. I'll let you know. Like, I just I'd have to speak to a colleague about it. But and
it would be really useful for them to set an example for other government departments. I think that would be really useful, because we were at a meeting recently, for example, and there was somebody there not from the equality part of the Department of Equality, Children, etc., and he had never heard of the public sector duty. I mean, that to us was quite shocking. Anyway, we'll move on. Laurie, you had a question or a comment, indeed?
Just the membership of the collaborative forum. Like, could you give an example, or maybe what numbers are on that forum, and is there membership of the civil society panel of service users on that forum also?
Yes, the answer to the second question on the collaborative forum, then it was small to start with. Our idea was to build it.
So
we started
would have been.
Go on.
Sorry, Anne, it was just that
keep going.
You're coming in and out a tiny bit there. So some of the examples would have been the ETB were on it, the CIPSI, the HSE, Galway City Partnership, those kind of organisations mostly.
Galway City Council.
Galway City Council. So,
and was there any individuals from the civil society? On that also. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Caroline?
Hi, and I was just wondering, would you then be able to link in with the others that have received the funding between the LECP and the local authorities and the PPNs to bring the elements that you have done already to their notice, so that there would be that commonality and that expertise that would spread through the other pilot ones as well?
Yeah, there is a national event on the 4th of May. No, not the 4th of May. There's a national event coming up at the start of May, and CWI has been asked to give an overall presentation on what it means to do, you know, to consult, to engage, to include people in these types of processes. So we'll certainly be drawing in other lessons where we can to showcase good examples. Yeah.
And is that going to be in particularly in relation to what you've done here with the public sector duty and the pilot LECP projects?
It's for all LCDCs in the context of the new LECP planning that's just about to commence. And what CWI has been asked, because I no longer work with that project at local level, because now work with CWI, but we still are engaged with it because we just happen to live in Galway. So we'll be drawing on the good lessons associated with this particular project, definitely in our own presentation. But Galway has been asked to do a presentation as well, so I'm sure they'll be doing it. They'll be talking about that.
Good.
Any other questions?
Sorry, was there membership of the PPN on the collaborative forum also? I'm just curious.
See, I worked for the PPN, Laurie, so we were leading it.
Yeah, no, that's I get you. Yeah, sorry, Anne, sorry.
But it is a question around other PPNs as well, and the extent to which they would engage as being located, because in Galway City, as Anne knows, the PPN is an independent PPN. And so it's outside of the local authority, whereas in lots of areas they're inside the local authority. So it's not a civil society
PPS
managed structure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions before we break people up into groups to have a bit of a conversation?
Sorry, Anne, I've just one more question, just because I'm not as on top of all these things as yourselves. But you know, the LECP process, there was also the guidelines for developing those, you know, the way like we put the public sector duty into the corporate guidelines for developing corporate plans in local authorities, and that was quite effective in at least getting each local authority to reference the duty. But I was wondering, in the LECP guidelines, is the duty in there? Or is that just for different local authorities? Because it'd be interesting to get the duty into those different guidelines, and then that kind of might also have a multiplier effect. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just wondering where but you probably don't know, but I can also
and I don't know off the top of my head. I know it was part of our own submission into those guidelines, but I swear I just can't remember if there's, but I would find out.
I can but it's just that
I'll send them to you, and I'll do a search through them myself. I should know.
If you come across any kind of documents like that, and if the IREC could write to the different whatever body it is and say, look, can you put the duty into this? It is a great way, because people tend to really follow those guidelines, you know, to the book in public bodies, you know, about, okay, I need to put this in. So it's about that raising awareness, because as you said, when you meet somebody who's never heard of the public sector duty, you know, when it's been 7 years in place and in a key body that deals with those kind of issues, you know, we probably need to do a bit more work around that, maybe. IREC has to.
I'm just looking there. I just looked there. It is in it. It is referenced, and it's saying that you should take cognizance of the duty.
Okay. It's good to know that. Yeah, but there might be other gaps, and if you want, let me know. We can always follow up on that as well. Yeah,
we'll certainly be doing it in our presentation to that national event. We'll definitely be referencing the public sector duty, and again, as you say, reference to them as not compliance, that they do need to do something real with it.
It says they should fully consider their responsibilities with regard to public sector duty and ensure that the objectives and actions detailed in the LECP are designed to support these responsibilities where appropriate. And then it gives the IREC link to the public sector duty.
Oh yeah, okay. I guess in guidelines you can only say so much, but at least this signpost to further information. That's great. Thanks, Rachel.
So we were hoping to break up into groups to have a bit of a conversation. We are running a little bit behind time. So I am wondering, is that okay with people still to break up into groups to have a bit of a conversation? It'll be a little bit shorter than we hoped. So we have a number of questions, and like we've had a bit about general comments on what people have heard, but we can make sure that everybody has had their say. The second question is, what in your view is the role of civil society and of community workers in promoting and enabling, in ensuring implementation of the public sector duty? What opportunities and challenges would present themselves, and what additional supports would civil society and community workers need to fulfill this role? Does that sound okay with people? Yeah, okay, so I am just going to break people up into groups. Just hold on a second.
So what, 10 minutes on, is it?
I think we only probably have 10 minutes now at this stage, yeah. If that's okay with people. Rachel, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just open up and take 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Hi again, everybody.
Again.
Sorry for the rushed nature of these things. Geez, they're always right. You think 3 hours is a long time. You always end up, trying to speak really quickly. So we have a few questions. They're in the chat if anybody wants to check the chat. And just before I forget, if anybody does need to leave early, there is a link to an evaluation survey in the chat as well that we'll be doing. And we'll send it out anyway after today. So we'd be delighted if people would fill in that evaluation survey so we can learn from today, which would be great. Okay, anybody want to kick off the conversation? Like maybe if we focus on, what's our role as community workers in relation to the public sector duty?
Look, government policies and actions and hold them accountable.
Okay, so that accountability bit. Okay, what do we need to do to hold people to hold public bodies to account? What would we need to do, and what supports would we need to support us to do that?
I think discussion forums, and I think the example that you gave from yourselves in Galway, I think if you got a culture, just from the perspective, if you visit a city like Galway or Cork, you feel that culture of participation when you're there. I'm just concentrating, just giving an example there. I think when you have bodies that talk to one another and work with one another and prepared to share, you get that discussion, and that has to happen not just on the bottom of development, but in the middle.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Anybody else?
As me again, sorry, I guess we need to be like this kind of training course is great so people so as community workers we understand the public sector duty, because like I have very limited knowledge of things. So yeah, if people need to understand the powers of the public sector duty, and for engagement.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicola. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's mostly about like promoting it, making sure everyone knows what it is, and then also offering help when it comes to the assessment. That public bodies know about the whatever civil society group it happens to be, and that they're there and they can assist with it, because I'd say a lot of public bodies are a bit stuck with like how to maybe go about it and stuff. So
yeah, it's not an easy process, Caitlin. It genuinely isn't, and we learned a lot. We learned a lot from, I suppose, from doing it about the overall framework and how the overall framework really, so the overall assessment of the public bodies needs to happen first, but it can be very difficult to persuade them to do that. So starting incrementally and saying, okay, yeah, we'll work with you on the art strategy, even though it's not within the context of an overall assessment, was one way of doing it. But you can't get stuck there, and you have to keep pushing for that overall assessment. But then trying to make it accessible, trying to make it as user-friendly, because it's not an easy exercise. It is a whole of organisation. They can find it very, very daunting. And the values-led way that people have engaged with can be a bit of a head wreck, actually. And what we learned from that is, yes, you do the discussion about the values, but then you let the values, people couldn't, so in the assessment we took a sort of an action based approach. So the values were there, but then we focused on the actions and looked at, do those actions live up to the values? And that was a critical piece of learning for us, because looking at it's difficult to explain in the abstract, but if you take the values-led approach, it can be a real head wreck. You do need to get down to practicalities, is what we found. Paul?
Yeah, one of the things that came out of that process that we went through to develop the inclusion strategy, which was, we had engaged Values Lab and Neil Crowley to take the council and the participant organisations through the process of developing the inclusion strategy. Obviously central to that strategy then was the recognition of and the development of work around public sector duty and the implementation of that. And that's where I'm saying there's a signing up to the idea. The practice we're not so sure about, and I think one of the suggestions that came out of that was that there would be the implementation group, which took in the partnership companies, it took in HSE rep, TUSA rep, the Gardaí rep, sports partnership, is that we would also have an implementation group of that, from that process, to look at how does the public sector duty, how does that consciousness be developed, and then the practical steps be developed as part of that strategy. So we're so aware that it isn't just the local authorities, but local authorities are often identified as being very sensitive to criticism, very quick to circle the wagons, very quick to say, oh, what you're saying is we're failing, and then the engagement sort of stops. So we're sort of thinking maybe that sort of sectoral approach, with a leading role being played by some of the key NGOs, might help. Watch this space. I'm not saying it's going to work, but what we're trying to do is to couch the public sector duty understanding and then pathways to implementation as a collective process, rather than addressing an individual organisation like a local authority. I'm really interested in the overall assessment concept, though, because in a sense we went through a long 6-month process looking at all the values that we thought should be reflected in that strategy. They aren't necessarily the same values that might apply to the duty in terms of a local authority or other organisations, but it's a starting point.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, in most areas where there are good examples of, well, not even good examples, but examples of where the public sector duty is being applied or spoken about, or, in some way discussed, it's been led by civil society. It's not been led by the public bodies themselves, and it's not been led by IREC either. Now, we would have been fairly critical of IREC in terms of they're waiting for the public, for the community sector to start doing this work, when in actual fact, IREC itself should be doing a lot of this work.
I was going to ask about good examples of where good work is happening, or examples where work is happening. And I know we got information from Galway, but that's useful too as ammunition or as encouragement.
Yeah.
Just in the past, like County Wicklow would have been involved in an anti-racism diversity strategy. Now it's well out of date now. It would have been prior to, oh gosh, I think it was 2006 even. But it was done with a collaborative approach as well. And it encompassed using participatory learning approach, which meant you were learning all the time, feeding back, having consultation, having facilitation groups, inviting the facilitator groups to come back in and present, and then take ownership of that strategy. And it was so good in how it was developed. It sounds similar to the process Paul's using. And it's just that work is difficult, as you said, and it takes a lot of time. But if it's resourced and if there's buy-in, it really results in really, really valuable work. And there's no easy way of doing this, is there?
Yeah, you know, and there's a critical mass kind of needs to be developed. Like, it took us a long time, and we're still only at the start of the journey in Galway City to build that critical mass of understanding what it is and beginning, you know, the penny beginning to drop on people that actually we have to do this. This is a legal obligation. So how can we do it in the easiest way possible? But I think there's also a critical mass that we internally as community workers probably need to build in terms of our own awareness, and not just awareness of the public sector duty, but how to use it as a tool. And one of our key roles is to advocate for it to be implemented in whatever local forums that we're involved in.
Yeah, but I think it's also as well as bringing in the funding and the whole NGO side of things as well. Is that how, I don't know, it's a too big or I'm not going to go into it here, but it's how all this strategic work was done before. As community workers, we've done it for numerous years, and even prior to COVID, that networking had started to kind of dry up. And without that type of networking, you don't really have a civil society, how would I say, proper participation separate from funding, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So Angel, Clive, or Mary, not to put you on the spot, but if there is anything you'd like to throw in here at this stage.
Well, sorry, go on ahead.
Oh, sorry, Clive, please.
Clive first, then Angel.
Sure. Sorry, Angel. Now, Paul had mentioned there an example of a good thing, and I'm just thinking now, I might be wrong here, but I'm just thinking the National Disability Inclusion Strategy, say for an example, the 2017 to 2022 one didn't include the lived experience of disabled people. I'm coming from the disabled people's rights perspective. James Colley, the ILMI policy officer, he linked in with local authorities, developed a housing strategy to include the lived experience voice of disabled people to ensure that disabled people's rights were being upheld, and it was a public sector duty. And that housing policy has been taken on board by every local authority throughout the country. So it has, and following on as a direct result of that, the new disability inclusion, National Disability Inclusion Strategy, it does include the lived experience of disabled people. And also in terms of I found it interesting that IREC are looking at for the non-government organisations, like ILMI have a national and a local approach. So I do think that ILMI could partner up with the likes of IREC and in carrying out assessments, because and obviously just as Laurie had mentioned, and Nicola, the role of NGOs can be to ensure collaboration and accountability. I hope now what I'm saying there has come across okay, folks.
Completely. Like, Clive, I think your work to establish DPOs, disabled people's, or is it disabled people's organisations, or DPOs in each area, is so essential. It's absolutely essential to get that independent disability voice into absolutely everything. Like in the civil society panel, we had 2 reps that come from a disabled background, but they weren't tied in with any DPO, and it would have been brilliant if they were. So I just think that work that you're doing as an organisation is absolutely critical. And then that modelling as well is really good, because there's nothing better for the likes of a public agency than to be told you have to do something, but here's the way you can actually do it. You know, it really does make it easier for them to do it. Anke, were you going to jump in there?
Yes. I think that for us as a migrant-led organization who works with migrant refugees, our main challenge is to empower migrant refugees and asylum seekers in order to, as right holders, in order to share their experiences about barriers that they are confronting, and especially in some areas that we are working at the moment, rural areas, for example, about transport, employment, access to services. And I think that it means at the same time, the challenge to understand the struggles for recognition that those communities are confronting in those places, and the struggles about the redistribution, for example. I mean, understand it, and they understand that the migrants, migrants communities, they have their own dynamics of integration, and they are very much part of the way that they are having relation with public services. And
yeah, thank you for that. That's absolutely the case. Anybody else before we try and sum up in this really quick discussion? No? Okay. So anybody want to give feedback? Okay. So what we're saying is that the role as a community worker is to hold public bodies to account, and that in order to be able to do that, what we need is further training, the development of a culture of rights and equality, discussion forums such as these and other ones, and we need to be able to offer assistance to public bodies that are going through the process. We were saying that there are good models, but these tend to be community-led, but these also need to be, they need to be disseminated, they need to be used in other areas. And that, I was just writing a summary here, that we need further training, that development of a critical mass, that development of discussion forums. And ultimately, would I be right in saying that we need IREC to take a bit of a more proactive approach? Not just in relation to public bodies, but in relation to civil society, ourselves, and community workers as well.
Yes, and also you had there as well about what additional supports would civil society and community workers need?
And what do you think they would be?
I think it's to be allowed to network, for networking to be resourced, in addition to whatever role you fill wherever you work. That's just one thing, but I suppose you need separate funding, don't you? I don't know.
Well, to undertake initiatives, you need separate funding. Like the Civil Society panel needed funding. It needed to be supported. There's no doubt about that, yeah.
And also if it's in real life, pardon the whatever, it's costly as well if it's outside of online.
And I think that link between the national and the local, Clive, that you spoke about, the national organisation that is ILMI, but lending its support to assessments would be very useful. Yeah.
Thank you.
In this discussion, I think it might have been Larry mentioned about participatory learning approaches in Wicklow. And I'm just sitting through all of this conversation from the CPD kind of perspective, I suppose, thinking about what are the things that would help, which is what your last question was about. But I wonder as well whether in terms of the sorts of things that you've been discussing today, maybe there is, the support requirements, capacity building, support opportunities, further skills development around some of those specific aspects and methodologies that can be used by practitioners to help people get to grips with some of this stuff, because it is really actually complex and technical, and to do it requires a lot of understanding, but there are participatory ways that help people access and engage that. But for some practitioners, that could be a luxury, the opportunity to even explore participatory learning approaches, never mind what you might apply them to. So I don't know, but it was just something that I picked up there and honed in on a little bit and wondered if that would be something that might be beneficial, in terms of tools and approaches and methodologies, as well as knowledge and understanding of specific issues and contexts as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And the other thing that kind of struck me that leads on from that is maybe we do need to look at the learning from other areas, because there was reference to the CAN project in Dublin and there was reference to the Galway City one, but there are other examples as well. But to draw them together perhaps for a further piece of work on the public sector duty, I think would be useful.
And even sort of slightly outside the specifics of that legislation, it struck me that there are other examples of work that's being done around duty bearers and rights holders and holding duty bearers to account and how that happens, that might be beneficial for learning as well.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, we'll bear all of that in mind. I think the breakout rooms are going to close in a few seconds. So is there anything else that anybody would like to add? No? Okay, we'll see you back in the plenary, so for the last few minutes. I think the other group are tardier than we are. The link to the survey is in the chat. If anybody wants to, we'd be really grateful if people would take a few. It should only take a few minutes, but we'd be really grateful if people would take, because this is the first. It's the first of the initial 4, but we also anticipate that there'll be a lot more, and we also think that each session in itself will have branches, as even we were discussing there. So if you do take a few minutes to fill out the survey, we'd be really, really grateful. And don't think we learn from stuff that you might have felt could be done better. So please don't hold back if you think things could be done better. Okay, well, we just take literally 2 minutes feedback each from each group, or even less if we can, because we will be capturing it all in that guide, as we said earlier on. Rachel, will you go first?
Yeah, well, feel free to jump in as well, people. We kicked off kind of talking about the PPNs and saying that, like, even though PPNs are within local authorities, some PPNs are very kind of determined in relation to their independence and their role as in advocacy. And while that can be challenging, even in terms of the public sector duty and holding state agencies to account, can be very challenging. But also it is a role for PPNs to do that, no matter where they are. Is that the way we spoke about it, Caroline? So we spoke about just how difficult it is for volunteers and community, particularly volunteers, to be involved, to have their voices heard, to actually do representation roles, given the culture that exists within state agencies and how they view civil society participation on the one hand, and the participation of non-paid representatives as well. And that's a problem, and there needs to be a cultural shift within state agencies in relation to that. We spoke about how rights can be named, but it's very hard to convince people of the rights that they hold as rights holders when they just don't see them, and they don't have them. So even calling, that whole bit about duty bearers and rights holders, when rights holders don't have their rights, it's hard to convince them that they have rights and need to fight for them. We spoke about, everybody I think was pretty much in agreement that there is a role for all of us in our work to advance the duty, but that there are lots of challenges in doing so, and that, there's a whole range of supports that would be needed, including, that bit about building consciousness and confidence and capacity of community organisations, including volunteers volunteers in the process, the need for training for state agencies themselves. We talked about how all of that stuff can, and talk about the public sector duty and putting sentences into strategic plans and stuff of state agencies can happen at a very high level, but it doesn't necessarily trickle down through the organisation. It's not a whole of organisation approach and isn't evident in the actions of most state agencies. So I suppose we also spoke about sanctions and, you know, what are the consequences of not implementing the duty. And Jacqueline kind of highlighted what she had said earlier about some organisations in the UK undertaking a judicial review, where IREC could in fact also, you know, call on a public sector body to implement the duty as part of its legal obligations. So there are ways of pushing it harder, and you know, we kind of need to keep an eye to that. And then I suppose just that bit about building capacity, sharing best practice, sharing information with each other, and you know, things like buddy systems, all of that to kind of help build capacity at the local level is needed. If there's anything else, just jump in, people from my group.
That's great, Rachel. Really good summary of everything, I think. Thanks.
Well, here's the benefit of going second. We said all of that.
And just more.
But we said it better. No, it was so one of the things we would absolutely agree with is there is a role for community workers, and that is in relation to holding public bodies to account, and that's a big thing. And then that falls into different areas of work. And one of the things that we were saying is that there is a value to the likes of discussion forums. There is a value to further training so that people can understand it in order to promote the public sector duty and making sure that people know about it. There's also a value in developing a critical mass of people who know about the public sector duty and can talk about the public sector duty, to develop a culture of participation and of human rights and the engagement of civil society. We spoke about that there are good models out there, but they tend to be community led. So where there are good examples of practice there, they tend to have been pushed by civil society and our rights holders as opposed to the duty bearers within the area. There is a need, people felt, for further training in relation to this. And in terms of additional supports, we spoke about just being allowed to network, because the fact that their networking has been frowned upon for so long that people forget what it's like, you know, to talk to others in a room and to learn from each other. And, you know, one thing sparks another idea. And even from listening to you, Paula, today, you know, you realize the you know, the power of the public sector duty when it is actually used for a very distinct purpose. And so to be allowed to network, people felt that if you were going to take on something in relation to implementing the public sector duty, it does need to be resourced. You know, I know our civil society needed to be resourced. These things do not happen on their own. And also the whole link between the national expertise organisations and linking that into the local assessments would be really useful. And that was a particular example from ILMI, from Clive, but you could extend that out to traveller organisations, migrant organisations, disabled, older people's organisations, etc. Then we also talked about, you know, the participatory learning approaches, and maybe there's something we need to relearn around participatory learning approaches, and maybe that's something that falls back onto us, onto AIEB and CWI, and maybe to also do a little bit more work on the public sector duty, maybe for this group around the screen, on examples of what has gone on in other areas and looking to see whether they can be modelled. And I think finally there was a suggestion that IREC does need to be more proactive in relation to compliance by public bodies, but also in relation to that upskilling amongst rights holders, but amongst the community organisations and community workers that work with them and represent them as well. And it was suggested needs to be a lot more proactive in relation to that. Anybody from my group want to jump in? If I missed anything or no? Okay.
That was it. That was really well summarised.
So any final comments that anybody would like to throw in the mix? Okay, so I am just going to go around the table the virtual table just one more time and ask people just for one word about how they feel after the long three hours that we've just had, if that's okay. Mary, you're first on my screen. What word jumps to your...
Informative.
Very good, thank you. Clive?
Mary, you got in there just ahead of me. Empowered. So.
Okay, thank you. Ankle?
Okay.
Useful.
Good, thank you. Caitlin?
Sorry, I'm trying to think of one word. Like daunting, but in a good way. You know, like once this is undertaken, I mean, in 5 years or so, you know, Ireland's gonna be a much better place. So.
Okay, great, thank you. Anna?
I think for me, coming from outside, this is not just one word, sorry, marathon. It felt like a gallop today. I've learned an awful lot about public sector duty in the South.
Good, very good. Lisa?
Fueled, maybe.
Oh, that's good. It's a good word. Laurie?
Included.
Good. Roisin?
The need for collaboration with other agencies or other NGOs to work together, the importance of a united voice.
That definitely wasn't one word, but I'll let you away with it. Yeah. Thanks, Roisin. Caroline?
Well, considering most of my words have now gone, you know, informative, empowered, I'm going to go with absolutely practical, and to say that the 3 hours flew by. I thought it was terrific. Thanks a million.
Nice. Thanks, Caroline. Kate?
Challenged.
Good. Paula?
It's 3 words: sense of solidarity.
They're good 3 words. Good woman. Nicola?
I can't stick to one word either, but I feel like I've got another goal in my, like it's like I feel like I've got something now that I know can be useful in terms of challenging or changing something.
Yeah, very good. And that was in the descriptor. It was supposed to be a tool, so hopefully that's what you've gotten. Elaine, I can't see on the screen, but your name is still there. Okay, Jacqueline?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to, definitely not going to come up with one word, but I was just going to say, can people like think about applying on the grant scheme for if you're interested in the duty and feel inspired today, but the closing date is the 18th of May, so that's not one word. But I would say, like, I've learned a lot from all your questions and all your comments, and thanks. It's been really, really, really helpful and useful for myself as well. Like, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Rachel?
Yeah, I just have ideas because my head is going now of what we might do next. So yeah, ideas. And a question for Jacqueline on the funding applications. Does IREC look favourably on collaborative applications?
Well, I don't know if any of you went to the information sessions. Now, they were on this week, which was straight after Easter, but yeah. I did a presentation to one yesterday, and I remember Fidelma saying that you, as part of it, that you can do, like, say if you want to do a collaboration with, say, a public body, as long as you apply because there's only applications from civil society, but you can put in like a collaboration, say, with a non-civil society.
Oh yeah.
But you can also put in one with another civil society, but I think there has to be a lead person, as far as I know. But having said that, look at the grant. I'm not an expert on this at all now, but I think definitely collaboration is encouraged.
Yeah. Okay.
And those, there's always recordings of those for anybody who has just had their interest sparked.
Yeah, there is. Like, I think they have been recorded.
They have,
yeah. And like, but there's grants at irec.ie. If there's any questions, I know that there's somebody actively on that until the 18th of May. So if you have any questions on it.
Yeah. Okay, so it just falls to me then to say thank you so much to everybody. We're really grateful that you took such a good chunk of time out of your day. We sincerely hope that you got something out of it. We will be following up. Please fill out the survey. And again, as I said, we learn more from what could be done better. So please don't hold back on that. So just thank you very much to everybody for your time. We will be back in touch with you. We won't let today just be, just the once off. We will look to do other things with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dan.
Thanks,
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Excellent session. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Jacqueline.
No, thank you very much, Laurie.
Kids. Sorry.
He's gorgeous, Paula. He's a lovely little fella.
Elaine is still there, but not there.
That was really good, hugely informative for me. It's completely different ball game.
Sorry to stay on. I just wanted to ask a question.
No, stay on. Yeah, stay